Warning, Star Trek from the Holodeck contains adult language and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not continue to listen.
Lock and load!
Fire!
Holodeck 3 program is reinstated.
Open sesame!
Commander Klingon vessel. We are energizing transporter beam. Now.
One, engage!
All right. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to Star Trek from the Holodeck. I am Michael, your host and captain of the USS Rainman Digital, and on the bridge with me is Ensign David. Hello, David.
Hello, everybody.
We have come back early from our winter break to discuss the recent straight to Paramount Plus Star Trek film, the 14th Star Trek film, and the first straight to TV or straight to streaming film, Section 31. Star Trek Section 31. Now, as I mentioned, it is a made-for-TV film released on Paramount Plus and directed by Olatunde Ushiusami and written by Craig Sweeney. The franchise takes a deliberate step into the morally ambiguous terrain of covert operations, philosophical dilemmas, and personal redemption. The series is set 2257. This film serves as a prequel to the second season of Star Trek Discovery and aims to bridge the narrative gap in Georgiou's arc between her recruitment by Section 31 and her eventual reappearance in Federation space. Now, while Discovery explored Georgiou's reluctant integration into Starfleet following her escape from the Mirror Universe, Section 31 extends her story by delving into the emotional and ideological complexities of a character grappling with the remnants of her Terran identity. And Georgiou's journey in this film is marked by her recruitment into Section 31, which is a secretive division operating in the shadowy margins of Starfleet idealism. And at its core, the narrative interrogates the extent to which survival and pragmatism can justify ethical compromises. Also, and this is where it gets a little messy, the story juxtaposes Section 31's morally fraught operations within Federation's utopian ethos, because I would argue they attempted to do that, but didn't really fully complete their agenda.
Yeah.
You know what? That sums up my initial thoughts. David, your initial thoughts, please.
My initial thoughts of this film. Number one, I was really excited for this film ever since it got announced. This is something that basically we had been waiting for as Star Trek fans for a very long time. Something that delves into that corner of the Star Trek universe that we all wanted to know about, which was Section 31. The darker or more gray side of the Federation. And most of the storylines that we've gotten for Section 31 have been some of the best character stories we've ever seen. Great examples from like DS9 and even in TNG. When Section 31 shows up, it's almost like the narrative for certain characters gets ramped up.
Right.
Even if they're like comedic characters.
Right.
So when it was first announced that Section 31 was going to be a film centered around Georgiou, who arguably is one of the biggest standouts for Discovery, and her character arc throughout the seasons in Discovery is one of the most interesting and one of the most compelling, because it starts off with the fact that this is not Burnham's Georgiou. This is a Georgiou from a different parallel universe,
And also a different time period.
A different time period?
Yeah.
That shouldn't be connected to Burnham from the get-go, but because it ties with the fact that in the Star Trek universe, there are certain threads for all these characters that have to be there. It's that defining moments or defining characteristics for these characters that kind of like force destiny in place. Is Georgiou is always connected to Burnham and has a connection to her, regardless of her own ideals and regardless of her own personality. And we see that basically because of that, the relationship that Burnham has with Georgiou, it changes a person who is arguably totally villainous. She's from the Terran Empire and changes her to the point that basically she becomes more Federation because of her connection with Burnham.
You are right, David, about a lot of things, as well as the aspect of our expectations. It wasn't just you and I who had expectations. All of us since 2017, when the Section 31 series, which is what it was supposed to be, was announced during and after, or rumored during Discovery Season 1 and announced between the gap of Discovery Season 1 and Season 2's production, they said, well, we're going to do a series about Georgiou in Section 31. We've been waiting for nearly 8 years, and for this to be that gift to us fans, I would honestly rather say, please, I don't want this gift. Can I return this? Does this gift come with a receipt?
Yes, it feels like, you know, like the Godfather scene where he's looking over Sonny's body and you want to go, what have they done to my boy? And it's like,
well, listen, if we're going to stay with those Godfather references, I'm going to put a horse head in Alex Kurtzman's bed for allowing this movie to see the light of day. And I know that's quite the strong statement before we even get into the real breakdown, but that's how I feel as a Star Trek fan. And this movie, despite its flaws, I will be fair, Star Trek Section 31 does boast several strengths.
Because that's what we are good at, Mike. We are good at looking at something and being fair.
We're, what's the word? Judicious.
Judicious.
Yes. Not apologist, and we're not shills.
We are guardians of the forever, okay?
Yeah. So one of those strengths is Michelle Yeoh's portrayal of Georgiou. It's compelling. She imbues the character with the same depth and complexity that was portrayed in Discovery's first 3 seasons. It transcends, in my opinion, the limitations of the script. She is such a good actor. The film's visual design, consistent with the more polished aesthetic of contemporary Star Trek, it also effectively reflects the darker tones of Section 31's operations and the brutal legacy of the Terran Empire.
Yeah.
However, the film's ambitions, and this is where it gets more negative, are undermined by structural issues. The first act suffers from erratic pacing, which disrupts emotional and narrative cohesion, while the transition into the second act is much better. It only partially recovers the story's focus. Themes such as remorse, redemption, and as I mentioned a few moments ago, moral pragmatism are compelling in theory, but David, ultimately it feels fragmented in execution.
Yeah.
And that's likely a result of condensing something that was supposed to be a series into a single feature.
And the problem with that fragmented feel, because I agree with you, is like, you open up the film with a flashback. And everyone that's listened to our show knows one of our pet peeves by far is the use of flashback.
Oh, and convention-wise, though, I don't know if I would refer to it as a flashback. I would say it just started in the past.
It started in the past.
Yeah.
But then it goes into a flash forward so that we can actually catch up with Georgiou.
Right.
But like, so you're going to establish, number one, the Terran Empire. Cool. Okay, let's see how long you go with this. But just like you said, it felt so fragmented because it was like, we're going to go from the past and then go flash forward to the future and then back to the past.
David, we already had the characters introduced in under 20 minutes.
Under 20 minutes.
And under 20 minutes, the characters were introduced. Now, granted, when you're writing a script, Screenwriting 101 says you should introduce all characters who are going to be in key positions within the opening act, which is typically the first 30 minutes. So job well done there. But talk about just ramming us with, I don't even want to say character development.
In doing so, you create like this feeling of I hope I use the term right, exposition correctly, where it's like all of a sudden everything gets thrust in at you as the reader so that this is for you to understand what we're doing.
It's my most hated trope in ensemble and spy capers or capers in general. It's how, what's a perfect example that's probably fresh on everyone's mind? Sometimes it works. Movies like The Italian Job
or Ocean's 11.
Ocean's 11, they do it all right. With Section 31, it reminds me of the poorly executed introduction of characters in the first Suicide Squad film.
There you go.
I absolutely hate when they say, well, here's your team. Oh, this guy is a verified badass. Killed 5 people in less than 5 seconds. Has a mean temper. And it shows them doing things.
It shows them doing things,
I fucking hate it. It's generic. It's so tropey. And it's not effective. It might have been effective 30 years ago. It's not effective. You should have just introduced the characters as is.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, this is so-and-so. And then slowly explain through their actions who they actually are throughout the rest of the movie. You didn't need to give us any actual development on any of these characters within the first act. All you had to do is make sure we know them. We know that they're here.
Yeah.
Then you can slowly introduce all of their quirks, their little expertise, if you will.
And that's the thing is like a really great classic example of this. And it's when I bring this up, it's because filmmakers today try to use this as an example and fail because it's a really great example, but it's hard to actually replicate is the Dirty Dozen. You do the Dirty Dozen or the Magnificent Seven, and you try to actually introduce all these characters all at once.
Oh, you know what, David? You bring up Dirty Dozen. Let's look at the film that inspired one of Dirty Dozen. It was one of the films that inspired Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah.
Look at Inglourious Bastards. When they introduce the bastards, do they tell us everything about the Bear Jew and about all the other characters and what their expertise and what they're about and why they have blood stains on their uniforms? No, they introduce them because that's the job you're supposed to do within the opening 30 minutes. Who are your players? But that doesn't mean you need to just fully flesh out who they are in 3 minutes.
And when you do that, here's the thing that happens with me when you do something like this. Your film becomes very predictable.
Yes.
And like the points in the film when basically, oh, this is going to lead to a twist. I could see the twist 50 miles away.
Yeah.
So like, without giving away too many spoilers, because
we can talk spoilers.
We can talk spoilers.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you get to the point where you have Georgiou dealing with the character from her past that commits Sand, who commits suicide in front of her because he can't live being a slave under her. And automatically, Mike, you know what happened? My brain, I'm like going, oh, he's the villain. He's coming back. There's no mystery here.
Well, David, when you see a character whose his identity is purposely shrouded, and there cannot possibly be anyone else because the movie's so small as well, and they only draw attention to our main players, which is a mistake because they should also introduce other side characters, a bartender, someone who doesn't have a major role, but someone that we can maybe think, are they the villain?
Are they the villain?
But they didn't do that. They gave us the characters that we knew were not villains, and then and then there was only one person left. You're like, well, okay. The movie didn't know what it wanted to be. Was it a spy film? Was it a spy caper, which are two different genres? Or is it a whodunit?
And exactly, when it tries to be a whodunit, though, Mike, in the middle of the film, when you're like, oh, who's the mole? Automatically, okay, I can already tell you none of these guys fit the idea of a mole except that guy. And I'm like going, okay, so there's no, I don't know why.
The one that looks like an alien mole? I mean,
and That's what I was like going, except that guy. And I'm like going, so this whole sense that you want to create tension, there's no tension.
There's David.
There's zero tension.
Yes. I can't even add to it because you're right. I would just be repeating you because there's just not a lot to even review when it comes to this movie because it's even like intellectually void.
Void, yeah. Don't say light. It's void.
Doesn't offer even the worst Star Trek film offers you some intellectual value. Star Trek Insurrection. Which we'll get to that in a sec. Star Trek Insurrection is a perfect example. It's not a great movie. It's an okay Star Trek movie because of its philosophical intent. Its intellectual value saves it for Star Trek fans.
I will agree with you with that. At least it tries to do the Gene Roddenberry thing that all Star Trek is predicated on, which is create discussion. Okay, let's create a discussion through this philosophical debate and our story. I totally agree with you about that in Insurrection.
Yeah. This movie doesn't really have a lot of that. And, and I'll get into the actual reasons in a second because I don't want to get too far off track here.
Yeah.
But sticking with the actual form of the film, okay? So there are also chronological oddities that seem a bit unrealistic. There's a lot of fuckery that they're expecting us to swallow.
And think about this, Mike. Not only is there like chronological fuckery, but motivational fuckery is going on too. Because like the thing I kept thinking to myself is the last time before this is supposed to happen, Section 30 or Georgiou, the last time we see her is like at the end of season 1. What the hell is her motivation of going out all the way out there just to steal a bar? To steal a bar.
I mean, you could argue that she's trying to do her own thing, trying to find a remote part of the galaxy where she's not being hindered by Federation law.
She's the emperor of the Terran Empire.
But when did she have time to do any of this, David?
And here's the thing, Mike. After I actually watched this, or tried to watch this again, I started thinking
I've
to
watched
myself,
it twice.
Yeah, I basically came to the realization that what the writers and the creators of Section 31 for this film were trying to do was try to play it safe. They didn't want to take any risks. They didn't want to do any of that because like
difficult.
Because when you look at the story that they gave us, it is so bare bones. I hate to say it, boring.
That's the perfect word for it, David. Bare bones. It is a very, you know what, David? Yes, it's a bare bones movie, but let's just call it exactly what it is. It is a straight to DVD bargain bin film.
There you go.
It is a paint by numbers movie. There is no innovation. There is no originality. It's like, have we seen this before? Yeah, let's go ahead and copy it, but call it Star Trek.
Exactly.
And let's not even copy one of the better movies out there. Let's just copy one of the worst movies that you used to be able to buy in the Walmart bargain bin in the 2000 aughts.
Let's copy my films. But like, and that was the biggest thing. I was like cracking up at the second time I was watching. I'm like going, I consider myself a bad filmmaker, but I also consider myself like educated to know what bad filmmaking is.
You lean into the bad filmmaking,
and I lean into it, right? But here's the thing, Mike. When I'm watching something and I'm like going, "Oh yeah, I know why they did this. Oh yeah, this is they're going to take this route. Oh yeah, that's why they basically put this here because they have to explain this." You have a bad filmmaker actually able to see your mistakes.
David, listen, we talk about Chekhov's gun quite a bit, you know, and yes, you're supposed to establish things and we're supposed to see Chekhov's gun, but it's supposed to be subtle. We're supposed to see it, not get shot by it.
Not get shot by it. And that's the thing. You shoot Chekhov's gun in my face now.
You assassinated us with Chekhov's gun. You're like, you see this? Fucking shoot you in the head with it now.
But that was the thing that, and almost the reason why I couldn't get through it the second time around was because at the end of the day, what you've alluded to earlier is like does this do anything for Georgiou's story?
No, because it does what Discovery Season 2 did way better.
Yeah.
Discovery Season 2 is arguably the best season of Discovery, Discovery's entire run.
Yeah.
Arguably. And you're redoing some of the best elements of Star Trek Discovery Season 2 and 3, which was Georgiou's development. It's retreading unnecessarily.
It's unnecessary. And almost, I would argue that it's retreading to the point that you're taking away from Burnham's story. Because, like, if the whole point of one of the key points of the Season 2 that was really great was seeing that development of Georgiou from becoming this, like, Terran Emperor who's ruthless and barbaric to becoming a Federation logical mentor to Burnham. And it's almost kind of like by saying that basically, oh, Georgiou started on this trend before Burnham. You're almost at the end. I was like, telling us, no, you're taking away from Burnham's importance.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I did like the inciting incident. I didn't like how all of it felt fragmented after that. I did like the inciting incident. I thought they was smart to start in the past and show us a young Georgiou and really show how she rose to power and what she was willing to do and how she now has to live with that. And that's something that truly bothers her. That I feel does or can coexist with the redemption that we saw in seasons 2 and season 3 of Star Trek Discovery. And of course, the reason for that redemption is driven or inspired because of her connection to Burnham. So yes, you can do that, but it should have been more like a companion, like an extra explanation as to why maybe she was already pre-softened to Burnham.
Yeah.
You know, yes, we already know that she has a daughter that looked like Burnham, and for all intents and purposes, it is Burnham. But what really started to soften her was this, coming face to face with someone that she deeply cared for and who betrayed her in a way that she'd probably never expected. That works. That concept does work. It's just the way the entire movie was put together. It was very flimsy. And as you said, David, it's very generic.
Mm-hmm.
It's very generic.
It's so generic, Mike. The one thing that just me personally, the one element that just also kind of bothered me was like you used the generic MacGuffin to bring everyone together. The God's End.
No, God's send.
God's send. God's end, God's send doesn't really matter, Mike.
Technically, God's end and God's send like, spelled the same.
And that's the thing. I'm like going, when
kind of like God's end better.
when you introduce that MacGuffin, I get it. You need a MacGuffin for a caper film like this. But when it treads really, Mike, on like Picard season 1 with the whole the power of imagination.
But I would even say Picard season 1, I think overall it fluctuates between like a 68 to like maybe an 80, and there's times where it's even a 90. And overall, it's probably like a C+ season.
Yeah.
David, this doesn't even come close to that, unfortunately. And David, that hurts. It hurts my soul. When I'm watching this, David, and when I was watching this, I had a smile on my face, like, oh, Paramount intro. Oh, the Star Trek inverted logo. That's pretty cool.
That's cool.
I was really excited. The bass drop at the beginning, it makes you feel like you're watching a real movie in a theater. And then about 15 minutes into the movie, I was like, my smile went to like, not a frown, it was concern. My face was like, oh, no, like this is going to fix itself in a second here. And then we get to the first act, the end of the first act, and I'm now frowning. And I'm confused as to why they did this. Why did they make us 8 years?
Wait for this.
We waited 8 years for this?
Yes. After all, think about it, Mike.
You wasted Michelle Yeoh's Oscar star power on this? How insulting to the fans and Michelle Yeoh.
Michelle Yeoh. And think about like me and you have covered this show, all of Star Trek for roughly 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And think about it, Mike, we've been waiting for a Section 31. All the speculation me and you have done over the years that they could have done a Section 31 film where it's a spy film. Okay, do a spy film of Section 31 in the Star Trek universe. That'll be cool.
It writes itself.
It
David.
writes itself.
Section 31 Star Trek, you get 20 of your hardest Star Trek fans and have them all pitch you a Section 31 series. And I guarantee you would have a winner. Just pick one of those.
Just pick one of those.
And you would have a winner.
And I honestly think they went with the retard choice.
Oh, David, we don't say that word here.
I'm sorry.
We
but
say,
blurt it out.
We say, yeah, listen.
They chose the Pac-Led.
You chose the Pac-Led concept.
I mean, I would love to be in a writing studio with a Pac-Led and all of a sudden, like, everyone's giving out these things. And then the Pac-Led speaks of this, I want something with Georgiou in the past.
And I want her to look strong.
Oh, God.
All right, David. So one of the most significant issues with Star Trek Section 31 lies in its failure to establish a meaningful connection with its characters. Most of them lack the depth or intrigue necessary to leave a lasting impression. The sole exception, and I'll only say because there's inklings of something great there, is Omari Hardwick's Alex Sahar, whose backstory does, in fact, add a layer of complexity and interest. Sahar is revealed to be a human augment, genetically modified and trained during the eugenics wars after being captured.
How cool
by
is that?
The notorious augment Jiri the Marked. That's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's a great character backstory. Now, I would love to see a series about this dude. It would be so cool. There's so much you can do with that. So even though the movie is bare bones, some of the concepts around the characters, even though they weren't fully fleshed out, was cool. And I would even argue that all the characters had the ability to be very interesting. The Cameloid character, to see a shapeshifter turn into a giant creature to catch one of his friends from, I believe when they were on the, I don't know what that was, the transport shuttle.
Yeah, I forgot what it was called.
And I think it was Omari's character that got shoved off, and the Cameloid shifted into some giant like alien species and caught him. That's cool. So there are interesting things, and all of the characters except for the cyborg guy were interesting.
Yeah.
So you had, let me bring up these characters here.
There was Fuzz.
Yes. Okay. So Fuzz was also, it was silly, but I understand what they're trying to do. And if you were really to focus on what this character is all about, there's a lot of interesting disembodied philosophy you can go into to really make a character like this work. You have, of course, as I mentioned, Quasi, which is the shapeshifter. You have Zeph, which is the cyborg, who I think is a complete waste of space.
Yeah, he was the mechanized body.
He
the
was
only
there
reason,
just to kill.
Yeah, he was there just to kill and to also use his body. That was the only reason.
Casey Rawle is a good actor, and she played Rachel Garrett,
which is awesome because, like, okay, there's your legacy. There's your legacy character right there.
Yeah, and if people aren't familiar with who this character is, she was actually depicted by another actor to be the captain of the USS Enterprise C in an episode where the Next Generation, there was a time travel.
It was a time travel.
It was a time travel element where the Enterprise C crossed over into the contemporary time period at that time when TNG was running. And we were introduced to this character whose fate is very depressing. She was to go back to her time frame just so she can die in order to secure the Federation's place in history. So the character comes with a lot of canon history, and she's an interesting character, I would imagine. But unfortunately, they didn't really utilize this character in any real way. She was more or less an excuse for the fans. Or I should say, as a buffer to fans who might have had problems or hesitations about a Section 31 series. And because you have to have those Federation Starfleet ideals, they just included this character. She really didn't do much.
She didn't do much.
She really didn't do much. And again, it's just more of the same problems. Now, when it comes to the philosophy,
there is none. There is none, Mike.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why I was probably disappointed by the end. No, not probably, definitely. Because number one, Star Trek should always have some type of philosophical foundation. Now, you can argue there was, but it got lost almost immediately. The film opened with a quote, "Fate, who makes the sword, does the forging in advance." And this quote comes from Aeschylus, which was a very famous ancient Greek playwright who also many people believe, yes, he was predominantly a playwright, but many later philosophers going into the Socratic tradition were inspired by him, and also some pre-Socratic philosophers as well. So using him as the opening was a great way to start, and it did get me excited because I read about this guy all the time in my philosophy texts. He's a very important figure in pre-Socratic thought.
Yeah.
So his work was primarily known as a playwright, but is often regarded as one of the figures who helped lay the foundations for philosophical inquiry in ancient Greece. His work, particularly in tragedies, deeply explores themes of justice, fate, and moral responsibility. So just that alone, justice, fate and moral responsibility are all aspects that played a part in the Section 31 movie.
And that's the thing that also got, I have to say, it did get me very excited because that's a Star Trek thing to do. It's very simple.
But David, it's like saying, let's say you're like, I'm going to embed the importance of 1, 2, 3 in my movie. I'm like, oh, really? What do you mean by that? You'll see.
You'll see.
And all you do is mention 1, 2, 3. That's all they kind of did. They just hit. Obviously, the movie's built around concepts of themes of justice, fate, and moral responsibility. But themes are different than philosophical discourse.
And in a lot of ways, it really felt like, a very generic thing, especially like when I watched it the second time and I saw it come up and I'm like going, this feels like, a Star Trek wannabe fan wanting to just say, vengeance is a dish best served cold, Klingon proverb.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, did they use some of the elements of that philosophy in the thing? Yes. But it's just like what you said. It's so rudimentary. It's like it doesn't affect your audience.
There should have been, David, some type of dialectic, like between Omari's character
and Georgiou.
There should have been a back and forth discussion of why they're going to do something or why they shouldn't do something. And then that's when you bring in Rachel's character, I always forget her name. Rachel Garrett. No, I was right. Rachel Garrett. Bring in Rachel Garrett's character to offer the humanist philosophical lens, and you're done. It could have been a 3-minute or 4-minute scene. You could have had them talking about what they're going to do, have a debate. Someone wants to do something. No, that goes against blah, 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 blah. And I'm not talking it needs to even be overt like the original series did at the end of every one of their episodes. Just something that feels organic between 3 people having a conversation, a plan of action. And in that plan of action, it slowly becomes not just a conversation, but a philosophical dialectic. If they would have done that, that would have fixed a lot of problems.
Oh, easily, because just like what you alluded to, Star Trek is supposed to be one of those franchises that creates discussion with its fan base. It's why, in a lot of ways, I always tell people, when I look at it now today, Star Trek's fan base is much more healthier than a lot of other fan bases because there's less toxicity, because we are built to actually be able to discuss with one another because we can see different sides of all the arguments because that's what Star Trek teaches us. And just like you said, yeah, it might be a Star Trek trope where it's like, oh, you have Kirk and Spock and McCoy discussing about something philosophically and then waxing and waning again about their own thoughts, and then you have it play out in the movie. And it may sound stereotypical, but that's what Star Trek's based on. Because if you look at it, it's just not like the original series. It's TNG. You have that with Picard, Data, and Riker. You have that with, even in DS9, you will have those monologues with freaking Cisco where he's like, you know, I can live with this. One of the best things ever, where the character is talking to you and literally saying, what about you? What do you think of this scenario? In Section 31, you do not get that. There is not a moment when Georgiou actually starts talking to someone. The closest thing is when she actually asks the character about his background, and he just tells her what his background is. You notice that there was nothing else after that. There wasn't any questions about, oh, well, what is that like? It was just kind of like Georgiou goes, oh, okay.
I would think, or not think, I guess I could say the strongest aspect where the film doesn't feel amateur is the visuals. But that's never been a problem with Kurtzman era Star Trek.
Yeah,
the
that's
visuals,
never been a problem.
Some of the CGI in Picard season 1 was a little but overall, the visual aesthetic, the set design, the mise en scène, the bells and whistles has been pretty top notch in Star Trek in the Kurtzman era. So the same thing could be said about Section 31. But everything else about this movie, it utterly fails, David. It fails as a movie. It fails as Star Trek. It largely functions like a pilot episode.
Yes.
More than a feature film. But I would even argue that, so yes, it functions as a pilot in that it introduces aspects that may be explored. And you have the hook at the end, which is a very classic pilot type of thing. And the hook being, what other stories can be told? You know, like the hook in Supernatural is the dad's journal.
Dad's journal, yeah.
That's what's going to propel the plot, the story, the narrative for the next whatever seasons. So you had the hook at the end. So yes, looking at it from that perspective, you can argue, oh, it's largely operates as a pilot. But fundamentally, if you break down the movie, it functions and is written like a feature film. The act structure, what you expect in between and within. And that's why I say this movie doesn't even work as a pilot. It doesn't work as a film. It's just a shoddy effort. And it defies logic. It literally defies logic because this has been a story 8 years in the making. You didn't need to make this type of movie. So ultimately, Star Trek Section 31, I would say, occupies an intriguing space within the franchise, and it expands Georgiou's redemption arc.
Yeah.
Unnecessarily, we didn't even need it, while exploring the darker and ideologically complex dimensions of the Star Trek universe. But its narrative shortcomings, David, and I would say its uneven execution limits its impact as a feature film and as a Star Trek film. And it makes me sad to say, David, that for Star Trek completists, Section 31 offers enough to warrant a viewing. If you are a diehard Star Trek fan and you must know what happens in every Star Trek installment,
then you can watch it.
For those seeking a daring, cohesive expansion of the Star Trek universe, this isn't it.
No.
This doesn't even come close. And sadly, when you look at Star Trek's cinematic roots that began in 1979, cinematic theatrical roots, of course, I'm speaking about Star Trek the Motion Picture, and how it was largely a intellectual meditation or a cosmic science fiction film, which I believe is an amazing philosophical piece. It has its problems as a film, but as a Star Trek piece, it's fantastic and near perfect.
Yeah.
You go from something highly intellectual, a philosophical meditation, to this. This is where Star Trek has fallen, Dave. And it's sad in its theatrical form, because as a series, I don't feel like it's in the same. I couldn't characterize it in the same way. I think the series started off kind of in the Kurtzman era, started off a little shaky, but by the end, I think it straightened itself out for the most part. There are still some problems here and there, but overall, it managed to straighten itself out for the most part. But now we're back to square one with this movie.
With the theatrical side.
And I just don't understand why you would even dirty the waters of Star Trek films with this. Like now this is now our history. This is now a part of Star Trek history. This film. Yeah. It's now considered the 14th Star Trek film. And I don't even want to call it that because I don't feel like it's a Star Trek movie, Dave.
It is. I mean, like...
And I don't want to be a gatekeeper on what things are and aren't, but for someone who's watched Star Trek 40 years of his life, this isn't Star Trek.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The question it becomes is kind of like, who was this made for?
There you go.
Who was it made for? Because like at the end of the day, was it made for us Star Trek fans? No. Then that makes me actually think, was this a way of bringing in a new audience? Was this a way of actually trying to get people who aren't used to the Star Trek way?
Okay, so that's where I was going with this, David. If we look back at J.J. Abrams' 2009 Star Trek, okay, that movie isn't a perfect Star Trek film.
Yeah.
But it is a damn good movie with a lot of heart. It doesn't have a lot of philosophy there, but it has the spirit of Star Trek.
Yes.
It feels like Star Trek in a lot of ways. And you can even argue that that movie wasn't necessarily made for Star Trek fans, but it was made for mainstream fans.
Yes.
And it was designed to breathe new life into Star Trek, which it did for several years.
Mm-hmm.
This movie isn't even going to appeal to regular movie viewers because it's not even that great of a movie.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, essentially, your comparison of basically we went from motion picture to Section 31 and how far it's fallen. It's like if you were to compare it in a mass audience sort of way, you go from Wrath of Khan, which is mass audiences know that, right? To Rebel Moon.
Oh my God, David.
And that's the spectrum of sci-fi that you just went through.
Holy shit, David. You know what? That is, for someone who might not, I mean, listen, you got to be dumb not to understand how we are reviewing this movie. But if you're still not quite sure, that's a great way to look at it. All the problems that were a part of Snyder's terrible Rebel Moon. This movie reflects all of those terrible mistakes.
But here was the thing.
It's just a bunch of random flash.
Yes.
For reasons that we don't understand.
And it was supposed to, jingle the keys at the audience to go, oh, look, it's really pretty. Yeah, right? You like all this effects and all the flashy laser sword fight scenes, right? Yeah, here you go. And then Section 31 was the same way, where it was like, oh, here's all these Star Trek things, right? You like these characters, you like the alien races, you enjoy this universe, right? Well, here's the keys, here's the Terran Empire. Yeah, that's Star Trek, right? Here's Rachel Garrett. All right, awesome. And in a way, that's what I realized at the second go round. I was like, this isn't meant for me. This is meant for, say, someone like my wife, who is not a big Star Trek. She does not watch Star Trek. She's more Star Wars. And if she wanted to get into Star Trek, this is the movie that they're going to try to tailor made for her, who has zero knowledge of Star Trek.
Yeah.
So,
but you know what this actually does, Dave? It does the opposite. It actually hurts Star Trek Discovery more.
Exactly.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
You have finished the job that Gretchen Berg, or whatever their names were, Aaron Berg and Gretchen. Who were those showrunners from the first season of Discovery? The ones that got fired for being meanie bobinis? Yeah, congratulations. You added more tarnish to Discovery when it didn't need it. It fixed itself, in my opinion, by the end.
You just walked up behind it and said, oh, we got to put it out. Boom, right behind in the back of the head.
Yeah. We don't need these straight to TV features anymore. I don't want any more. I don't want, if there's any talk about it, I'm going to make sure my voice is heard. I'm going to go to social media. If they are sold on these short form installments, then just do a limited series. Like if this series was fleshed out, David, a la Sherlock,
I think so.
Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock series. You remember each season was 3 episodes, but at the end of every season, you're like, wow, that was only 3 episodes. It felt so complete because they were so concise and expertly written and executed on screen. If they do stuff like that, I think they would get more bang for their buck because they put all this money into a movie that is not ever going to earn them any of their investment back. Fans aren't going to really care about this movie. Years down the road, no one's going to revisit this movie that's a Star Trek fan. Yeah. No one's going to be like, yeah, I'm going to rewatch the Star Trek movies. This will be something that people skip. So don't waste time, our expectations, or money and resources on doing another straight-to-TV feature film if it's going to work in the same way.
And guess what?
If anything, Mike? David, throw an extra $1 million, throw an extra couple million, and just extend it out by 3 episodes and give us a limited series. If you want to do that, I understand that you're trying to fill in the gaps or I should say the gaps of production in between seasons of Strange New Worlds and the upcoming Star Trek Academy. I understand that was the original idea. Well, let's do some of these movies, these one-offs, as ways to kind of fill time for our fans. I don't want it. I don't need you to fill time with this type of stuff. I don't want garbage to fill my time. I don't need you to hand me an empty bottle of
formula.
Yeah, like here you go. Hold this. This will pass the time. But if you are sold on that, if the producers are absolutely set in their ways on doing something, then give us a 3-episode, 4-episode limited run.
Yeah. I honestly think if they were to actually spread, kind of like pace this out into 4 episodes, it would have been easier to digest.
David, yes, you're right. If they would have taken the content of this movie and spread it out, it would have been 1,000 times better. It's just jumbled.
Because think about it, Mike. You could actually do the first episode solely on Georgiou in the Terran Empire. 1 episode. Just her totally in the Terran Empire timeline.
Really quick, David, and I think we're saying the same thing. I want to make sure we are. So please tell me if I'm incorrect. Our problem with this movie is not the problems we've had in the past or even the anti-Kurtzman fans have with Star Trek currently. It's not about the content. What's being said and done is not the problem. It's solely the execution.
Yes, absolutely. No, 100%. It is the execution of what you're doing. And that's the thing that I hold pretty much paramount in anything that I look at when it comes to being a critic on Star Trek and any of the other, franchises that me and you have covered, is like, you can't change what you're given. So you can only basically look at how they executed it. And what they executed in front of us was
shit.
Not just shit. It was just lazy. That's the problem, is like, well, we need to actually do a feature-length film. So we're just going to smash everything that is essentially a Cliff Notes into a feature film. And you can't do that.
Yeah.
Not with this, especially when there's certain expectations that are needed in a Star Trek film.
This almost felt like a prologue to Discovery Season 2, like a summary, not even a fully fleshed out prologue. It's like a summary of a prologue.
It's a summary of a prologue. And, would I actually be interested to see where if they were to actually, just like what you alluded to, is like, maybe this was a pilot and they were going to do more of this. Would I be interested into seeing a series? I would be interested.
They didn't even give us any sexuality. And I know that's asking for a lot,
Georgiou.
but that she has been firmly established as a minx.
As a minx.
She's a sexual deviant.
Yeah.
It's been fully established. Why did we not see that aspect of her personality, which is fucking funny?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there was moments where she said, I think there was some flirtation with Hardwick's character. I mean, who wouldn't? The dude's a buff motherfucker good looking dude. Watch Power.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the best. Jesus, that series is so good. It's made me actually a huge fan of Amari Hardwick. That's one of the reasons why I was looking forward to this movie. In fact, you and I talked about Hardwick's casting. Like, holy shit, Omari's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's my problem, David. That's the biggest problem with this movie. At the end of the day, and these are my final thoughts, I guess. The problem is not the content itself or what it's saying. It's your movie. It's the execution.
Mm-hmm.
When we find out about Omari's character's backstory, it's interesting. All the characters are somewhat intriguing, but you don't do a thing with it.
Him.
It's just a bunch of fuckery for fuckery's sake. It feels like the moment the movie starts, it feels like the writer's thinking, how can I end this? And it's one big rush to the end.
Yes.
So it hurts me, David. But this movie is a 49%, which hurts me because even Star Trek's so-called, in fact, I don't even like to say that because I'm such a Star Trek fan. I don't even like to say there is a bad Star Trek movie. But even, let's say, the least greatest.
Okay, least greatest.
Of Star Trek films, which I would say is probably in between. It's a race.
It's a sad race.
I say it's in the race. It's a race because I don't know who's going to reach the end. It's going to, maybe at some point I'll decide. I still haven't decided. Into Darkness, meaning, of course, J.J. Abrams' rebooted film, Into Darkness or Insurrection. Now, I would say Into Darkness functions fine as a movie.
Yes.
As a Star Trek film, it is awful. It is stupid. It's outright laughable at points, especially when they try to recapture the emotional impact.
It's cringeworthy.
It is
cringe.
David, that's the perfect way to characterize it. It is cringeworthy. Insurrection is a failure as a movie, but I feel like there's a lot of philosophical value. So maybe Into Darkness might be the worst. But even that would be maybe like a 70. Insurrection would be maybe like a 70, maybe a high 60. David, this is just bad on so many levels, and it hurts me to say it, not just because I love Star Trek, but I am a huge Michelle Yeoh fan. You know this. I'm a huge Amari Hardwick fan. But it is what it is. Got to be honest. It's a 49%.
You gave it a 49. I'm actually there with you. I'm around. I actually, at the end of the day, gave this a 50. I was leaning toward a 55 because one of the points that I wanted to point out is like, see now what you're talking about worst Star Trek films. I think all my friends that listen to me know what Star Trek film infuriates me the most, and that is Insurrection.
Yeah.
And Insurrection to me is a 50. Because it just makes me so angry.
Insurrection's not a 50. Shame on you. Shame on you.
It makes me so angry because the one experiment I tried to do was like, okay, I watched Star Trek Section 31. I was like going, well, that was bad, but is it the worst? So I went back and I watched Insurrection. About 40 minutes in, I stopped Insurrection. I go, nope. I don't want to see Worf go through puberty again.
I know.
I don't want to see them rob Geordi of his vision.
I don't care that Commander Riker's face is as smooth as a baby's butt.
Exactly. I don't care about Riker and Troy getting it on like they're teenagers for some strange reason, or Picard turning into a melancholy, like, I don't know, over this woman that he barely even knows.
Meanwhile, for some reason, Beverly Crusher's in the background and there's no comment, even though there's always been this unstated relationship between the two of them.
Exactly.
Even to the point where when Picard does date someone or he's interested in someone, it always creates an awkward situation between him and Beverly. That wasn't even in there in Insurrection. It was like, whatever.
Exactly.
No,
so
I do agree there's problems.
There's problems in Insurrection. So, like, to me, Section 31 is just a shy above Insurrection to me, because I'm like going,
what?
It's just a shy.
David, I'm going to have to go get my gun and perhaps shoot you, or at least threaten you.
Because I just couldn't bring myself to watch Insurrection again. But
All right.
I made it past the midway point for Section 31 before I decided to walk away the second time around. So that has to mean something.
This is an important stat, I guess. So according to Rotten Tomatoes, Section 31 is in fact by a landslide the worst rated Star Trek film from both fans and critics. And now that's saying something, David. And you can even argue, okay, are there ideological reasons why fans aren't liking this? Is it the usual, Kurtzman era? Kurtzman era is a sham. It's awful. Bring back Roddenberry's corpse and reanimate it with the Genesis Project. Yes. But what was I saying? I got too animated, Dave.
You were talking about how basically just combine the vitriol against Section 31.
Right. So usually you can say, okay, is the fan rating because just the usual fan complaints? And you can look to the critic score and say, okay, possibly there's some room for debate here because with Discovery, there are big gaps. On almost everything Star Trek of recent is huge gaps. Critics tend to love it. Fans tend to not like it. Up until yesterday, the critic score was lower than the fan score.
Yes.
Now, as it stands of our recording, critic score is 22%.
22.
And the
Ow.
audience score, Dave, is 17%. That makes me sad. That actually makes me depressed for Star Trek.
Makes me depressed.
This is a tarnish.
It is. It is their biggest. It's their biggest like fumble, I think, honestly, up to this point of like Kurtzman's era. This is the one we can all pretty much universally agree with as fans and as critics. Section 31 is their biggest mistake.
Okay, really fast. Let's go through the tomato scores for all the Star Trek installments, and then we'll close out. Yeah, fuck you with this.
What?
Star Trek the Motion Picture, 52%.
Oh, screw you.
Get the fuck out of here with that.
That's bigger than that.
Yeah.
No. Go to Insurrection, Mike, because I feel justified.
Hold on. I'm trying to find the Star Trek movies, but they're not listed here. Franchises. Here we go. Okay, Star Trek Beyond. We're going to go backwards, okay? 86%. I'm going to just do the critic score.
Okay.
86%. Into Darkness, 84%. Star Trek 2009, 94%.
Okay.
I would agree. That move, I watched it recently, 2 weeks ago. Dude, such a good movie. Oh, yeah. It really is. Star Trek Nemesis, 38%. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that either.
I don't agree with that.
I've never understood. Listen,
I like
it's an
Nemesis.
imperfect movie, but I don't agree that it's nowhere near 38%.
There's no way near.
Star Trek Insurrection, 55%.
Told you. I told you.
I would say maybe a 60.
No.
Star Trek First Contact, 93%. I agree, if not higher.
Yeah.
Star Trek let's see. Star Trek Generations, 47%. I do not agree.
I don't agree with that. No. Generations is much better than 47.
Star Trek Undiscovered Country, 83%. And fuck you guys for this. Star Trek The Final Frontier, it better not drop below Section 31. It's at a 23%.
What? Final Frontier?
Star Trek 5 isn't. I understand that movie is severely flawed. It is probably the most flawed Star Trek movie up to now. Section 31 now takes that that cred. But man, it's rich with philosophy.
It is.
And emotion. And it's so Star Trek on almost every level. So fuck off with that 23%. Nowhere close to 23%. Star Trek The Voyage Home is 81%. Star Trek The Search for Spock, 79%. I'd probably agree with that. I love that movie. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, 86%.
Oh, screw you. That's in the 90s.
I would say that's in the 90s too.
It's in the 90s.
And then the motion picture is 52%.
And that's you can make the argument that that's less than Wrath of Khan because that's at least in the high 80s.
Yeah, I'm going to have to do a contrastive essay on The Final Frontier and Section 31. because I want to analyze it, because there's no way this could be substantiated by any real critic. If they were really thinking about it, there is no way those percentages should even line up as much as they are now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's why it's interesting to me that basically there are times when I do agree with some of the scores, but then there's like times when it's like a gigantic swing and it's like,
Insurrection,
wait,
you seem to agree with.
yes,
That's the
Insurrection I
only
do.
one.
That one I agree with.
Into Darkness, I think is rated a little too high.
That's a little too high.
Yeah.
Like it's an 80 by, I think partly because while we as Star Trek fans don't like Into Darkness, there's a lot of like mass audience that are not Star Trek fans that actually liked that movie.
Yeah.
I've ran into. And I'm like going, okay, well, if you like it, you liked it.
So just so people get an idea, David, the difference between, or the contrast between Star Trek Discovery and Section 31. Section 31 is a spinoff of Star Trek Discovery. The critics liked Star Trek Discovery with an 84%.
And I would agree with that.
It has nothing to do with ideological reasons of content. It's solely because the movie sucks. Not a good movie, execution wise. Man, what a sad day, Dave. But you know what? Not nearly as bad as it is for Star Wars fans. I will say that, because at least we have
the grass.
Some would say we're operating at about a 50-50 right now with the current era of Star Trek. I would say it leans more to like an 80-20.
Oh no, I would go 80-20 in our favor.
Star Wars is like a 20-80.
20-80. And like
20% good, 80% shit right now.
And you know what? I love Star Wars also. I'm a geek and I love Star Wars, but I'm sorry. Star Trek has them beat hands down.
Currently, yeah. Without, well, all the time, in my opinion, intellectually, always.
Yeah.
Now, currently, in terms of content, yes, as well. Without a doubt. I'm not embarrassed to watch Star Trek. I turn on Acolyte. I'm like, what? I'm just joking. I liked Acolyte. What was the one I didn't like? Oh, Fett. Acolyte had a lot of problems, but I didn't hate it like I hated Fett and still hate The Mandalorian.
Like a Jupa?
Oh, my God. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Hopefully, we didn't have anyone say, how dare you, sirs? We expected you to like Section 31 because you like everything Star Trek.
We call it as it is.
We're just fair. That's all. If it's not good, it's not good.
Yeah.
All right, David. Thank you.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.
I couldn't help but notice your pain.
My pain.
It runs deep. Share it with me.
End simulation.